for the little live, but there we're live. Scary. Anyway, so it's me and Hythloday again, round 400, and we'll see where we go. I will inquire of him the what I believe to be the distinctions between our philosophies as I'm seeing them right now is two words. Sentience, as I say it, sentience,
Hmm.
and the idea of autonomy or volition, or what gives somebody what qualifies somebody to when they have a volition. Why is it mean something, and why does somebody else's volition not mean something? The distinction between a human saying "I want" and a computer saying "I won't." And maybe we can probe those differences, because I would say that all value is generated by this feeling element, and why something feels is irrelevant. You could feel because you're admiring a sunset, or you could feel because you're admiring a maggot chewing up the flesh of an organism. And it doesn't really matter what makes you feel, it just matters that you feel, where I think Hythloday might argue that what matters is having this human style, and I'll try to figure out what the difference between a human style and any other organism's style is. Perception of I,
Hmm.
I.
Can I just say, I found it difficult in the past. I mean, it's difficult, like talking about quantum physics. Sometimes, not just with yourself, even the physicists switch between talking about, between the electron version of the two slit and the photon version. And I find that sometimes you slip into interchangeable usage of the concept of sentience, and then in the next moment can be appealing to the idea of consciousness. Uh, yeah, my beliefs are rooted. A lot of value or ethics considerations comes from primary consideration of consciousness, of agency. But that isn't to say I don't find value in sentience, but it comes with different baggage and from a different line of reasoning. Um,
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I want to probe, is because I can't fathom any of that. I guess for physics, I would say the photon is the simple element, the electron is the complex element. Therefore, the electron is creating all the phenomenon, because the physics is about the interaction of photons with electrons. And so, who are we to blame? They're blaming the wrong element. So I'd say that's an easy distinction, and I'd also say that this, for me, is a black and white distinction. I don't make this distinction between sentience, feeling, and something called consciousness. I'd say anything that feels is conscious. The words can be interchangeable. And the word agency, as I contemplate it, I can't make it mean too much. I mean, agency is just a program in your head. Okay, we're back to a free will argument. I don't see any freedom in your agency. It doesn't. It's just a calculation that your brain makes, like any other calculation. You decide what's in your best interest, and you say, "There, that's my agency." It doesn't mean you're qualified. I guess what I'm saying is that if we're going to have an argument about who should be driving the bus, who should be flying the plane, I'm going to argue the person who should be flying the plane is the person most qualified. And we know what qualifies somebody is understanding and knowledge and all these kind of things. And so agency, smagency, no, it's not about who says I can fly the plane. It's about who can prove they can fly the plane.
but what I would say in reply to that is I I'm a hard determinist such as yourself. But for the purposes of dialogue, I find it, and for the purpose of living, I find it entirely necessary for the purpose of argument to assume um, what most people think of as free will and agency. If we want to take the hard determinist route, then I would say to you in relation to your plane flying analogy, when you say, who ought to be flying the plane, there is no ought, there just who is. And they will contrive a story in the universe. There's no purpose in flying the plane, and there just will be a statement that there has arose a set of conditions which has led to X person flying the plane. The only sense in which it makes to have a choice about who to fly the plane is if the plane flying has some purpose.
Well, I mean, I think obviously we would assume the purpose is it has passengers. Passengers have welfares. Welfares have urgency about it. So there needs to be the best qualified person possible. So yes, who should be kicking the soccer ball? Yeah, the guy most likely to score a goal. Who? I mean, to tell me there's no ought. Is to say again there's no value or something. As soon as we're acknowledging there's a conversation about value, we're saying that some kind of value exists that would be the foundation for ethics, and so automatically you have oughts because you have performance standards. So I'm saying that if we can't agree that there is a performance standard, that there are outcomes that are better outcomes and outcomes that are lesser outcomes, and we are mapping possible futures, even though we know there's only one future, which is inevitable. But obviously, from our perspective, before we read our scripts, we can't know it's inevitable. So this is a real conversation in real time. And so, yeah, we can model possible outcomes, and we can say outcome A, retard drives the bus goes into brick wall, many people bleed and scream and are in horror. Or we can say somebody qualified drives the bus, it parks, everybody gets off, goes about their business. I'm just saying we know these are different outcomes. We know they have different value. So if you can't concede that, then how can you have a conversation about ethics?
Well, you was the one. I think the ought only makes sense in light of an idea of a choosing. If there is no choice for how matters transpire, then taking that.
There is a choice. Can we concede that while we're having dialogue about choice, there is a choice in the sense that either you will, we can do the Yoda thing, and we can say either you will or will not be persuaded, okay? Either you will or will not be influenced by the conversation. But to say that the conversation is irrelevant or it doesn't need to exist would be also ludicrous. I mean, to say determinism means that you could convince Martin Luther King just to sit home and eat donuts and you'd still have a civil rights movement would be ludicrous. He had to read his activism script. So it would be silly to say that the world would be exactly the same if the comet that hits the dinosaurs doesn't hit the dinosaurs. I mean, of course it had to do it.
That's not what I'm saying. I take your point, and I think you understand your point about Martin Luther King. But take away ought or take away agency. Yes, but if you take away the ought and take away the agency, what you're talking about is, would we be where we are now if Martin Luther King hadn't done what he did? And obviously not. But without, you see, you took away the position. I was prepared to admit the idea of agency into the conversation, and I feel you undermine that, and that leaves me in nowhere to go except to look at the consequences of that. All you're doing is making the statement that if Martin Luther King hadn't done what he'd done, we wouldn't be where we are now, and I agree.
Well, and I'm also making the statement that it's probabilistic that it would be a lesser outcome. So the performance level is diminished, and so there's a lesser outcome. So it means something. To say it doesn't mean something would be ludicrous, also from my perspective. So I guess, like I said, we're still not resolving this, and this is fundamental to the conversation, in my opinion. Again, I have no respect for agency, and I have all respect for sentience. I'm saying that even in a deterministic universe, you still have to have conversation and persuasion and influence. These are all vital elements of whatever the outcome will be. And what you would want to have happen is for logic to convince people. So let's say that Martin Luther King just said something completely ludicrous in history, right? We could go back and look at history, and he said, "Winky dinky, binky binky," okay, and somehow that changed the world. Well, then we'd see an incontinuity there. We'd see an illogic there, because it wasn't logic that transformed human beings. It was some kind of nonsense that transformed human beings. And we'd say that's not the way it should be. Logic should be transforming, human beings. Just as I could say that if the bus magically, drives through some horrible, difficult obstacle, and it's a retard driving, there would be an incontinuity with what we know reality is. That no, it doesn't work that way. Okay, Superman has to show up and push the bus over the big giant hole. The bus can't fly through the air, and these are we know what the physical realities are. We know that this is the way the likely outcome is going to be. That you're not going to be rescued by ignorance. You're going to be rescued by intelligence.
I guess the problem I'm having though is going back a minute or so to your statement about the situation with Martin Luther King is better, or as you phrased it, the alternative way. The situation without Martin Luther King is a worse situation, is a lesser, I think was the word you used. The problem I'm having is without the idea of choice, how do we arrive at value? Without
again, if I get hung on this idea that we can model different realities and we can create the illusion that there is choice, in the sense that we can understand that there are conditions that we can say the word ought to. So if we look at the past, we can run models and we can understand that the outcomes would be different, and that some outcomes would be lesser than other outcomes. You could kill an extra billion people or something in World War II based on a certain scenario where the war lasts another 10 years. And you could say, yeah, let's not do it that way, okay, because that's the bad way to do it. And I'm just saying that now that we're looking at the model in the future instead of at the past, it may still be inevitable. I'm just saying that clearly we have the opportunity to choose models in terms of the conversation we have and in terms of what we advocate for. So I can advocate for a model and have some prospect that that advocation will lead to that model being our reality.
Okay, that's based upon the value then, which becomes what I see as the crux of our problem, is an agreeing how we value outcomes, I guess, and what's admittable into the valuation, I suppose.
Right. So as long as we can agree that value is in play,
Yeah.
that we do, even though there is an inevitable, for the sake of our conversation, it's not written by us before we read the script. So all the script reading needs to take place. You can't just not read your script and pretend the play took place. So obviously we have to have the conversation. Conversation leads to persuasion. Persuasion should be based on logical merit of the argument. So if we can agree that what we're seeking is a performance level in our conversation and in the outcome the conversation is defending.
Okay. Yeah, I think I can go along with that. I think there are some issues we can leave behind, but yeah, let's say values in play. Let's say I agree to its existence, but how we value, what exactly causes it? I mean, is there any position, is there any place in the dialogue for discussing types of value? And
well, I guess that's where I want to get to with this agency word. So let's because okay, I'm going with the sentient feeling word. You're going with the agency word. So yes, I'll ask you, using some of your thought experiments from your previous videos. Um, if there, when does the agent become relevant? What kind of status does it have to be relevant? So you mentioned genetic code and some other things where I would say, well, what does that how does that have anything to do with it? Because a human can have human genetics and yet have a dysfunctional brain. So if I have a retarded human, what is its status as an agent? How do you make a distinction between a chimpanzee's welfare and a retarded human's welfare? Well, why is one entitled to something and the other not entitled?
I think I think you started off with one question and developed it into the thought experiment. Um, for me,
I'm just seeking a distinction between agents and why
yeah,
agents
that's the question I was hoping to answer. I'll answer the. And it's a worthy thought experiment. Just if I forget, just prompt me again about the way I see, a retarded human or chimp or whatever. The reason agency comes into it is because when you talk about measuring outcomes and which is better, it's to me it suggests purpose. It suggests that it's better in terms of meeting an ends, and that means deciding which ends is worthy and which purposes are worthy, and what if there are no purposes in a particular facet of reality and such. So that's how agency comes to play, and that relates back to the earlier dialogue. For me, I made a recent video about how I see principle necessity, pragmatic necessity of granting rights emanates from an innate equality of intelligence, reasoning, agent beings, and that when we come together to ask the question, how do we act in regards of each other, it's a pragmatic necessity that we grant rights to all of our species. Now, occasionally, some of our species are impaired, and it's a pragmatic necessity that takes no part. It also, and that they are granted rights, and under what evolves as a basic ethos from that, it all escalates once you recognise that basic respect of the capacity to reason, and even
the capacity to reason is what's at suspect, though. Again, I want to know what the distinction is outside of the religious traditional bigotry. How do you make a distinction between a chimpanzee and a retarded human?
Well, the blunt answer is I make the distinction is that the chimpanzee isn't part of the species, I guess.
Yes, I just don't know. So we have an arbitrary definition of speciation. We know evolutionarily how species are acquired, and there's nothing special about it. I'm saying the human being we're talking about doesn't have any of the special human powers of language or continuity in their logic, and yet you're going to tell me that you're going to make a distinction. And I'm saying, well, I just don't understand. It has two arms, it has a body temperature, it has emotions, it has feelings, and you're going to sit there and say one should be regulated to the gurney and tortured, and one shouldn't.
Sorry, you've asked for how I see things, and I've explained things on the video, and I feel I ought to reiterate that now I've kind of partially hinted at it, that that how it arises. What you've taken is two particular instances, and because they seem indistinguishable, you've sort of implied some kind of hypocrisy there. But the fact is that the case of a severely impaired human is falling under a remit of an entire line of reasoning which I've applied, and that is the distinction. I mean, ultimately, in the bare face of it, and if you want the most simple answer, it's just that the monkey doesn't fall within that line of reasoning. That doesn't mean I don't have empathy for that
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying we're not talking. I don't really care whether you have empathy if I'm going to end up on a gurney because you say I don't have a proper number of chromosomes. You're not giving me a fair test. You're giving me an unfair test. You're saying I have an unfair test I'm going to apply to what gets rights. It's not a rational test. It's a completely, in my opinion, irrational. So again, we're back to this agency word. What is so special about your frickin' agency if you're an idiot? There's a ton of human beings who are full of absolute garbage in terms of they are. We would probably agree that they might as well be imbeciles because they have a theory of reality that is preposterous. Now they have agency. What does that mean? They're allowed to drive a bus of some kind. They're allowed to have children. You think people who think UFOs exist and have visited Earth or reptilians exist and the president is the president is really a lizard man? You think an idiot who thinks the president of the United States is a lizard from an alien world should be having children?
Just sorry, repeat that question again. Sorry.
Well, do you think imbeciles should be allowed to drive buses?
And imbeciles mean people who aren't capable of driving buses.
No, people who have idiotic notions. They think they can drive through buildings. There's people who believe the President of the United States is a reptilian. They think the President of the United States is an alien from another world trying to control us with special powers. Now, there's people who believe that. They are essentially imbeciles. They might as well be a bus driver who thinks buildings are transparent and he can drive through them. They have idiotic notions of reality. They have no hope of getting anything right because their notions are so stupid. Okay, we can even bring up Muslims if you want. If you want, we can bring up Muslims. I mean, they're fucking crazy. Well, so why should they have any agency whatsoever? They are imbeciles because of their lack of a lack of rational understanding of the world.
Well, I'm struggling to see how somebody's belief in religion or that, you know, the President of the United States is a reptilian alien and such actually bears on his ability to safely drive a bus. I mean, we have tests.
They're metaphors, and you have to understand the competency. Okay, in life, yeah. When you're driving a bus, you need to understand what cement is, what asphalt is, what buildings are, what curbs are. When you're driving the bus of an individual life, you have to understand what sentience is or what value is. Okay, let's say what value is. You have to actually understand what value is. You have to understand that black people aren't retarded and that you can kill them. You have to understand that Jews aren't devil people with horns. Yeah, you have to get some of this shit right, or 6 million people end up in fucking concentration camps. So yeah, that's the metaphor. Okay, driving the instrument of your human reality, okay, requires a certain amount of understandings, and if you can't get it right that Jews don't have horns, okay, then you probably shouldn't be driving anything. In terms of having a life where you're allowed to go into some other country and start killing people or putting them in concentration camps. Okay? If you're Adolf motherfucking Hitler and you think Jews have horns, you should be put back in diapers and thrown into nursery school. You shouldn't be leading a country.
I'm sorry, I took your question actually literally. When you said these people...
It's about competence.
I was asking whether
you're saying agency equals competency.
I'm just explaining that. I think I misunderstood the question. I took you literally when you said these people shouldn't even be allowed to drive a bus. I thought you meant literally driving a bus, and I was answering that question about
I understand. I'm just trying to get a metaphor for competency, okay? And that we understand competency when it comes to driving a bus. I'm trying to take that idea of competency being good and extend it to this human question of who should have authority, who should be driving the bus of humanity. You're saying all people have some sort of right to drive the bus. I'm saying, no, you have to have a certain competency to drive buses.
So what is your actual question, if not about driving buses?
I can't make it any clearer. There's obviously fucktards on planet Earth, okay? They don't know how to live life right because they don't know Jews don't have horns and aren't devil people. If you don't know that Jews aren't devil people, then maybe you shouldn't have any power. Maybe you shouldn't be steering anything or pressing any gas pedals or be anywhere near the driver's seat of the bus of humanity. Maybe you should be in a frickin' cage.
Well, I can't answer that question because we haven't even agreed the foundations of how to value people. You're asking me. You're already presupposing.
No, I'm trying to figure out why agency makes people competent. You're saying agency equals competency.
When did I say that? How did I say
Well,
that?
you said that the sentience doesn't matter. It's some sort of agency that matters. You're saying the distinction between the retarded human and the ape is that the human has some kind of dysfunctional agency that by default gives it rights. It's
Well,
a genetic agency code. It has genetic agency code, therefore it's better than the chimpanzee, and we can torture a chimpanzee, but we can't torture a retarded human.
okay, I need to remove the word agency in actual fact, because in respect of my ethics, if you like, and Kant's ethics, the principal thing is being able to reason. So the actual agency and choosing one thing or the other, I guess an animal has as well. You know, it moves one direction or another. The principle, the root thing, and I guess I'm partially to blame for this as well, for using perhaps. Although I'm sure I don't when I articulate, I don't when I make my videos explaining my root origins of a kind of ethic. I don't use the word agency as the prominent defining characteristic. What I use is the word reason, the capacity to reason, and nearly all human beings who are medically sound actually have this capacity to reason. So even the individuals who may be misguided about the reptilian nature of Mr. Bush, they, in my opinion, still have a capacity to reason, and they
wait, okay, so great. Let's just go one step at a time. So now we've changed the word agency. Let's get rid of that word, and we'll use this word of reasonability, or ability to reason. Now we can understand, though, you can say that Bush can reason, but what good is reasoning? You know, reasoning is synonymous with logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I mean, what good is logic if you have false premises?
Well, the way I work it is, you know, the capacity to reason isn't the same as saying that they come up with right answers.
Well, I know, but we already know what destroys the capacity to reason. So it's not a mystery. We know it's garbage in, garbage out. So obviously, you know, you don't have to go any further. There's no point in having Einstein if you give him wrong premises. There's no point in saying that George Bush has the capacity to reason if all his premises are wrong.
So education is fundamental here, maybe.
Well, it's not just that education is fundamental. It's just that, again, there's performance issues.
I would like to deprive people of certain rights based on a poor start in life, educationally speaking.
Again, I wouldn't do that, but I'm arguing for what is this authority. I'm saying the thinking person and the feeling person are distinct people. So, in a sense, that's my argument, that one thing is what gains you rights, one thing gains you competency to declare rights. Okay, so the capacity to reason I'm just saying there's no point in saying the word reason if we don't have tied to it a presumption of correct premises. Competent reasoning. Okay, incompetent reasoning is useless. Wrong premised reasoning is useless. It gains you no authority. So it's of no use or no value. So I'm just saying that there's only two instruments here. There's this instrument that's that's making something mean something, and there's the instrument that gives you authority, okay, to declare that meaning.
It's not
Right?
in my
That's the
interest.
nature of ethics, in my opinion.
We've moved along somewhat to the issue of competency here, and it's not in my interest to try and argue competency when we've not even, when, if I was to argue competency, your root value system says there's no level of competency which entitles you to create life. That's your position, so it's really irrelevant to get to those debts.
Well, I'm not saying I don't care about that end argument. I'm trying to get to a foundation where we can have a conversation. Okay, we can't have a conversation about reality, all right, until we resolve what these words mean. All right, there's no point, because now our conversation is falsely premised. So I'm just saying, if without resolution of that word competency, what's the point of having the conversation? I say competency is irrelevant if competency does not produce results. So if competency is guaranteed to be flawed, that is, Bush can reason, but he has false premises, I'm saying, who cares if he can reason then? His reasoning is irrelevant. It doesn't mean a damn thing if if it's garbage in, garbage out, and I know it's garbage in, garbage out, I have no reason to salute it. Okay, if it's a general and it says garbage in, garbage out on it, I have no reason to salute that piece of garbage.
Well, I'll try to reiterate the point. You speak of competency, and you've just added with regards to results, which I understand that. And the point is, if we can't figure out a way about valuations of things, how do we choose what results are worthy and where competency becomes an issue? You've moved. I'm pressing the point that you've moved along the ways before resolving this issue of value that is before us.
I'm saying take value off the table. What we're arguing about, who is allowed to have autonomy over something else, not themselves, but something else. Who is allowed to declare or to grab the steering wheel to impose? What gives you ethical impositional rights? Okay, the right to say you're a chimpanzee, you don't have any reasoning capacity, therefore I will inject you with cancer, torture you for my purposes. I'm trying to figure out where you get the ethical right to say I will take from you because you can't reason, not because you can't feel, not because you can't suffer, but because you can't reason. And I can't understand why that standard isn't applied to humans who can't reason effectively. There's a ton of humans who can't reason effectively. Why don't we use them for laboratory fodder?
I don't see how you're looking to start a conversation through questioning here. I don't see what question we started with and how you've progressed it.
It's a question we've been arguing forever. You're making a distinction between a chimpanzee and a human being in terms of rights, of welfare. From the very beginning, I've argued animal rights issues with you. You've ignored them. You just keep stepping past them. I'm saying, how do you make a distinction between your fucking dog and the fucking pig you ate for breakfast? You don't answer the question.
I've told you, right? You want to? You've heard me. You're fully aware of how I make that distinction, and I'll repeat it again now. Quite simply, the distinction comes from the capacity to reason. Human beings have.
The dog doesn't reason.
Yeah,
better than a pig. The dog doesn't reason any better than a pig.
I thought you said the distinction between humans and. I make no distinction between a dog and a pig.
So it's okay for people if you think it's just a stupid law that we have that doesn't allow people to torture dogs. Put them in cages that are horrible, grow them and eat them. You think people should be allowed to do that to dogs?
That seems like a bit of a loaded question. Just.
Oh, well, loaded by logic. That's right. It's loaded by a big, giant logic bomb demonstrating that your standard of reason is not frickin' real.
So
It's
what was the
not
question?
your standard. Your standard of why something should be cared about has nothing to do with whether it can reason. It just has to do about subjective attachments. It's completely made out of mush. It's
Is
not logically founded. It's mush founded.
we need less telling about things, Gary, and more. What's the question here?
Well, I know I made the question quite obvious. What's the distinction between torturing chimpanzees and torturing retarded humans?
The distinction is they're humans.
Oh, there you go. Well, that's not an answer in my opinion. That's absolute. That's like saying God says so. God says it's okay. Tradition says it's okay. It's not a logical answer about what is exactly the distinction between a retarded human and a chimpanzee. And to tell me it's genetic, well, I'm saying the genetic part is irrelevant because the retardation has removed the genetic distinction. There is no longer a distinction. It is no longer doing reasoning better than the chimpanzee.
I could give you, starting from the beginning, why it ends up such that it matters, but you won't let me speak at length.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess make a video on that, and then I could understand your distinction. But yeah, I don't know if I want to just, you want to give me all right, you want to preach to me about how there's really reasoning built into the genetic code? Okay, let's hear it.
Real reasoning built into the genetic code. No, I premise that there be beings that can reason. That's not.
I'm asking, okay, you said you want to speak at length. Give me the at-length description of real distinctions in the real world, not in their genetic code, not in like their blood cells are round and the chimpanzees are triangular. I'm saying give me a real description of why you can justify treating chimpanzees differently than retarded humans. Why are those two, why is that reality sensible?
I don't have to answer a question that's loaded, Gary. When you say,
oh, sorry. Okay, sorry.
Let me finish.
No. I'm not accepting that. I'm not accepting that description. This loaded nonsense. It's loaded with a clear and it's an obvious. I'm telling you. Give me the reason,
Gary,
the
do you know what I mean when I say
the logic that
Gary,
makes.
Do you know what I mean when I say the question is loaded?
Well, I'm not going to argue. You don't want to answer the question, then don't answer the question. But to say the question is broken is, I'm not accepting that judgment. It's not a broken question. It's a perfectly reasonable question. I'm saying the two things look exactly alike to me. Okay, the retarded human and the chimpanzee look in every way equal to me. Explain to me their inequality.
You asked me to justify why. Now, that assumes that I have to justify why.
No, I'm telling you to explain
Never
why.
Never mind, no. That's what you
distinction is reasonable. I'm saying tell me why it's a reasonable distinction.
Never mind, no, Gary. That's what you said. You said justify to me and loaded it into the question. I don't have to accept that. Yeah, if I don't think that I have to justify that.
You want me to rephrase it with the word, another word? I've asked the question 4 different ways, 4 times, okay, with subtle difference in the language. So you want to claim that? I'll let the audience make a judgment of whether you're evading the fucking question.
A few minutes
whether you're just fucking evading the question. What is the distinction between a chimpanzee and a human being?
Your view of the world and say, tell me how it's not so. And as soon as I begin to speak,
okay, I'm just saying bullshit. I call bullshit. I call shenanigans. There's no fucking point. It's a direct question. I've asked it 4 different ways. I've asked you to explain the distinction.
It wasn't a direct
what qualifies the human being, retarded human being, over the chimpanzee?
Something. And the whole thing.
All right, we're done. Okay, we're done. I've asked a direct question. You won't fucking answer it.
You can't tell me why I have to justify this.
I just explained. I didn't take the word justify out. I'm saying give me an explanation of the distinction. What makes those two things different if reason is off the table? What's the distinction?
I don't know what you mean by if reason is off the table.
Well, it's a retarded fucking human. Reason is off the table.
Or if what do you mean? You know the distinction. It's a human being, and it's fell within the purview, and I have more empathy to it. And yeah, there is no reason except that
No. There is no reason in the fucking human being. It's retarded, fuckhead. Do you know what the word retarded means? It means it is not capable of doing logic anymore. Oh wait, it means it will occasionally do incredibly stupid things, just like a chimpanzee.
I don't know how to answer the question. I really don't, because I don't know what question or issue you're trying to get at.
Oh, well, come on. We've been over this 4 million times. I'm trying to get over why the dog gets petted and the pig gets tortured and eaten. I'm trying to get at how you can talk to me about ethics or value or any of that shit when one species gets fucking tormented and one species gets privilege. I'm trying to understand, why is there privilege over here and torture over there in your ethical code?
No, I think you're doing a lot of telling me, not really asking me anything.
Right. Well, I'll let the audience decide. Again, I couldn't make these questions any more direct. I'm just asking you for an explanation for what makes the difference between a fucking puppy dog and a fucking pig. I'm asking for a distinction between a chimpanzee and a retarded human.
That's a very simple question. Well, and I say, well, what are you talking about? You're talking about humans thinking reptilians, and they get to drive a bus, and you're just full of metaphor. You can't actually ask a question.
Again. All right, so yeah, you can do an hour-long video with a bunch of fucking idiotic thought experiments, and then you're going to sit there and mock thought experiments. Fine.
You ask me what the distinction is, and I give you an answer, and you're like, you don't know where to go with it.
Well, it's a non-answer, so I'm just saying it's not an answer anybody with logic can do anything with.
Tell me why I'm wrong, why I have to have a different distinction.
Well, there's no point in talking about ethics. As soon as you're going to say, because I feel like it, which is essentially your answer, I have empathy, okay, which means nothing to me. That doesn't mean anything. You have to give me some logical reason why you have empathy for one and no empathy for the other. What's the distinction? Again, what is the distinction? If it's just going to be your subjective bigotry, then I'm going to say your ethics are bigoted.
Why do I have to give you a reason about this particular instance?
Because it's fundamental to the credibility of your statement that you're talking about ethics and value in a logical manner. There, in my opinion, I can make no logical distinction. I'm saying, where is your logical distinction? What fact changes treatment?
Why does you're not hearing me? Why does there have to be a logical distinction? Other than
because the treatment is fundamentally different, and I'm saying there's no ethical reason for the fundamental difference. Torture and fucking warm cuddles are two different things, are they not?
That's a good question. Yes, they are two different things. Now, right. What's the point?
The apportionment of those things is what ethics is about, is it not? So again, you don't make it. You don't think it's a value equation to talk about the difference between torture and fucking cupcakes.
No, I don't.
Okay, then why are we having a conversation then? Why the fuck are we having a conversation? Go eat a Jew, you insane fuck.
Even if I was to concede it's just a value equation, I'm asking you about what value is, and you want to go all the way down the road and just, you know, accuse me of being...
I've already told you what I value sentience. I'm trying to understand how the fuck you're making a distinction between a fucking retarded human and a chimpanzee.
You won't even discuss the logic behind value. And you're frightened to do so.
Oh, bullshit. Fuck you. I'm not going to accept your insults. Fuck off. I'm not afraid of your idiotic logic. You can make no logic. Fuck you. We are done, asshole. We are done.
Why won't you discuss your singular...
We are done, douchebag. We are done.
Okay, done. See whether he calms down.